Thank you for making time in your busy lives to join us today. I'm Karen Araujo, and on behalf of the Latin American Solidarity Committee, I welcome you. Senator Bill Monning represents the 17th Senate District and is Senate Majority Leader Emeritus. As an attorney, Bill and Dr. Dana Kent, his wife, were co-founders of the Salvadoran Medical Relief Fund with Dr. Charlie Clements in 1981. In the early 80s, Monning led human rights delegations as a member of the National Lawyers Guild to Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, securing the release of political prisoners. In the state Senate, Monning, I feel saying Monning doesn't work for me. I'm going to say Senator Monning. Senator Monning has joined colleagues to, Bill, thank you very much for that permission. Bill has joined colleagues to protect immigrants and to combat the administration's attacks on immigrants. Thank you for doing that. Bill and Dr. Kent, Dana, were active co-founders of the Latin American Solidarity Committee, which was revitalized for this event, and were the Sanctuary Movement. They were active in the formation and operations of the Monterey County Sanctuary Movement. That provided support to Central American refugees who fled the violence in the 70s and 80s. And I'm looking around at faces here, many of you who were involved in that. We thank you for that, and we welcome Senator Bill Monning.
Well, thank you, Karen. Let's give Karen and all the organizers a big thank you. And good afternoon. Muy buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a todos. I want to thank everyone who is here today for sharing your time. As Karen said, I think part of the objective of organizing today's event is for us to connect and also to help refine a message as we face not only an immigration crisis, but indeed a global crisis right now, that in the past, change comes from people pulling together and organizing. I also want to thank the Unitarian Church for hosting us this afternoon, the current LASK organizing committee. I want to thank especially Professor Dana Frank. Would you raise your hand, Dana? Dana has helped reach out and organize to some of the speakers you're going to be hearing from this afternoon. And she has a few copies of her book, The Long Honduran Night, with her. So if you're interested at the intermission, please connect with Dana. Professor Emeritus from UC Santa Cruz, who I've had the pleasure of knowing and collaborating a little bit, usually trying to get access to people in Washington, D.C. to return phone calls. But Dana, thank you for your work. Also joined by my wife, Dana Kent, Dr. Dana Kent, a partner in our early LASK organizing and Sanctuary and Salvadoran Medical Relief Fund work. Could I ask all the original LASK organizers to raise your hands? Those that worked with the Monterey County Sanctuary Movement, raise your hands. And the Salvadoran Medical Relief Fund, which moved over $1 million of medical aid to the people of El Salvador. Please raise your hands. And I want to also acknowledge a good friend and activist, Dr. Antonio Velasco, who's joined us. I don't know if it's from Mexico or Santa Cruz today, but it's good to see you. And, yes. And as you know, I'm kind of pinch hitting today. Originally, Dr. Charlie Clements was going to be in this speaking slot, and Charlie sends his regrets that he can't be with us. He's working with a new organization. Many of you know Charlie's history of working in El Salvador during the conflict as a people's doctor, who then worked in the formation of the Salvadoran Medical Relief Fund, and his work documented in the book and the documentary Witness to War. He's recently transitioned to be working with a new effort called the Every Woman Treaty Movement. And he said, I started working full-time recently for the Every Woman Treaty Movement as its chief engagement officer. They didn't waste any time asking me to set up a meeting with Dr. Rugunda in Uganda, followed by quick visits to Rwanda and Malawi as we try to line up lead nations to champion the idea of a treaty. This is to end violence against women and young women, girls, in the United Nations, much in the same way as we did on the International Convention to Ban Landmines, where the lead countries were Canada, Austria, Mexico, and Chile. We're now working to find those lead countries to lead a United Nations effort for a new international convention to protect women and girls from violence worldwide. So Charlie sends his greetings and his regrets, but I think I can communicate back to Charlie that we grant him a permission slip given the work that he is doing. I think to put in context, so much of the headlines are about the crisis at our southern border, at the border of the US and Mexico, and the crisis that we see in the horrific reports of children being separated from their families, of detentions, incarcerations, forced deportations after people have traveled thousands of miles. But what's lacking in much of that news coverage is the true story in the cycle of history that has people leaving their home countries really not by choice, or a choice that is one of survival based on duress, oppression, repression, and we're going to be hearing some personal testimonies and narratives later from our other speakers. But in the 1980s, at the time of US involvement in suppressing human rights efforts, civil rights efforts in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, again, there was not a good understanding of the reality on the ground in those countries. And that gave rise to those of us working with the Latin American Solidarity Committee, and later the Sanctuary Movement, and later the Salvadoran Medical Relief Fund, to build bridges of communication, bridges of humanitarian connection between those of us living in the north and our brothers and sisters living in the south. And it was building those bridges of communication that were not built or sustained by our government or governments. And it was our citizen diplomacy, our human diplomacy, that built bridges of hope, understanding, and eventually led to the change of US foreign policy. The crisis at the border, measured by children being separated from their parents. Over 2,500 children have been held in detention, separated from their families. We see a focus on that, and then we hear the current occupant in the White House who victimizes victims, whose speech is inflammatory, it's demeaning, it's racist, and he villainizes those who seek what so many take for granted, a safe place for their children, an education, and health care. Just this past week, the White House held its Halloween celebration where they opened the doors to children, and they had a mock wall where children wrote their names on a brick and stuck it to the wall. That was the messaging of this current imposter to young children, that what that White House represents is building walls, not bridges. So as the media covers the current crisis, I think our job as organizers in communities of conscience is to expand that understanding, whether it's letters to the editor, whether it's forums like this, op-ed pieces. It's pushing back and pushing out with testimonies and narratives, some of which we will hear this afternoon, that others can take forward and move out. So real quickly, we don't have time this afternoon to trace the full history, but I think one of the takeaways is that the history of oppression and exploitation of working people in the Americas, in Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, has been directed and influenced by external forces. As far back as the 1930s, popular uprising in El Salvador that was suppressed with the killing of 40,000 insurgents, as they were called, who sought a democratic future in El Salvador. And then in the 1970s, 1980s, the renewed uprising of people in El Salvador that many people in this room became engaged around. The history of Guatemala, a democratically elected president, Arbenz, Jacobo Arbenz, overthrown by the U.S. government's support for CIA initiative in collaboration with the United Fruit Company, the Dulles brothers, and displacing a popularly elected president that led to decades of oppression and resistance. Or in 1973 in Chile, the explicit involvement of the U.S. government and the CIA in the overthrow of the democratically elected Salvador Allende. So you trace those interventions back to planned U.S. government involvement, and it's often been over years the political process, the House of Representatives, that cut funding for the war in El Salvador, U.S. support. You have examples of the Boland Amendment in Nicaragua making it illegal to fund the Contras, when under Ronald Reagan, the U.S. government conspired with the Iranian government to sell U.S. armaments. Iran at that time was listed as a terrorist nation, and yet Reagan sold the missiles and they moved the cash. And Ollie North served time for that. And a guy named Elliott Abrams, who was a key architect of U.S. policy in the Americas under Reagan, and he was found guilty of felonies of lying to Congress. Well, he's been resurrected. He's now working in the Trump administration. So it's important that we know this, because as often as history changes, history repeats, and these cycles repeat. But we should be smarter than we were then and get back to the work of organizing and educating. So many who came to this country as refugees, fleeing war, fleeing violence, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala in the 1980s, who established residency, homes, and families in this country. Well, some of the children of those refugees ended up in our prisons, our criminal justice system, where they were introduced to gangs and gang violence. And then were deported back to their home countries for crimes committed in this country. Well, they took that culture with them. So we read about gang violence in El Salvador or Honduras. It was the result of a culture learned in this country and a shameful export, a culture of violence, a culture of victimization, and now thriving and armed with weapons like AR-15s left from U.S. military involvement in those countries. So the connections leading to the current migrant exodus from these countries can be traced to a history, a shameful history of U.S. foreign policy, providing the weapons, providing the cultural indoctrination in our prisons here, and then not willing to extend fundamental human rights to refugees seeking political asylum in this country, we have the White House using executive orders to undo laws passed by Congress to afford due process to anyone making a claim of political asylum, of fear of persecution if returned to their home country. So, with a strike of the pen, the Trump administration has thrown out decades of law development and practice, and it's never been easy to secure political asylum, but they've made it that much harder. I see my time is running out. Again, kind of an impossible task to capture that. Let me just conclude maybe with a couple of thoughts. One of which is I'm really looking forward to hearing from our guests who have traveled to be with us today, who have suffered and lived the experiences that I've tried to outline in very broad and general terms. But if there's any takeaway, it's for us to remain active and not to become demoralized or defeated by the constant rendition of tweets coming out of Washington, D.C. They're ultimately designed to distract. They're ultimately designed to use the creation of a chaotic sense of what's going on to mask the very methodical exploitation of resources, of people, dismantling of environmental protections, dismantling of labor protections in this country. We're not reading about that in the newspapers. We're reading about the latest tweet. And we need to push back and claim the intellectual space to educate and demand respect for the rule of law and for due process. And let me close with just something we've been doing in the California State Legislature. We've passed laws to protect immigrants in the state of California. We've passed laws to make it illegal for California police officers to collaborate with ICE and the INS. Those are being challenged in the federal court by the Trump administration. And I'm proud to say we've sued the Trump administration now 61 times. And just this past session, when we learned of the 17, the 17 women being held on prison sentences in El Salvador of 20 to 30 years, women who had miscarriages were charged with abortion and infanticide and sentenced to 20, 30 years in prison. It was 17. We did a Dear Colleague letter that we led from the Senate. It was signed by over 80 members of the state legislature, bipartisan signatures, and that was delivered during Governor Newsom's visit to El Salvador, delivered by our colleague Wendy Carrillo, whose family were refugees from El Salvador. She's the first Salvadoran descendant, Salvadoran, to be elected to the California State Legislature, and she delivered our letter to the President, and since the delivery of that letter, 7 of the 17 have been released. There's an ongoing human rights effort to release all of the 17. So again, thank you for being here today. We're stronger together. Organize, educate, organize. Si se puede. Gracias.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next will be Dr. Chris Hasegawa. Dr. Hasegawa was a founding faculty member and dean at California State University, Monterey Bay. Dr. Hasegawa arrived at CSUMB just before the doors opened in 1995. Remember when we saw that transition from military base to university, and all eyes of the nation were on us. He was also hired as the coordinator for the field-based teacher education program there. Dr. Hasegawa is a third-generation Japanese American whose family members were interned during World War II. Now retired, Dr. Hasegawa serves on the Board of Trustees for the Spreckles Union School District, and he serves as a member of the Board of Directors for the Pacific Grove Museum of Natural History. Dr. Chris Hasegawa.
Thank you. You all may be wondering why you're sitting here listening to a Japanese-American biochemistry professor talk about South America. And in fact, you probably wouldn't have been until about a year ago when they started to put some of the families in Fort Sill. And all of a sudden it hit me. Fort Sill was where my wife's parents, her grandparents were put during World War II. During World War II, they had come to the United States, they had had children, their children were American citizens, and then because they, at that point, weren't American citizens, and they happened to live on the California coast, they got sent off to Fort Sill. And they were left there, her grandfather was left there for several years without ever having any kind of due process or questioning, simply because he wouldn't sign a document that said he wouldn't forswear allegiance to Japan, but he didn't know what to do because America had put him in this camp, in this prison. And if he had forsworn allegiance to Japan, where did he belong? And while other people said, just sign the form, they'll send you to Arizona with the rest of your family, he wouldn't do that. And so Fort Sill is always stuck in my head. When I saw that they were putting families there, the immigration crisis suddenly became very real to me, became very personal to me, became something that I wanted to make sure that I could do something about because I was ashamed that history was repeating itself. And as an educator, I think we ought to pay attention to history. So as I go through and talk to people about my experiences, talking to folks, and you're going to hear from folks that are going to talk about their own experiences coming through the immigration process or coming to the United States. So I'm not going to tell you those stories, but I've been asked, why are you involved? And so I'm going to share a little bit about that, but I'm also going to tell you how I'm getting other people involved. Because there are all sorts of people in America's history that have come through immigration that weren't really treated all that well. While I turn around, I'm going to have to go back here because I got a short cord, but you can read this quote by George Santayana, which is really important. So Americans in the majority, those in power, have always had trouble with people coming in through immigration. Historically, Bill was talking about the historic context of South America, but if you talk about the historic context of the United States, immigration has been a difficult process all the way through. Okay, so look at this slide, and let me read something to you. These refugees, this is from a newspaper in New York, these refugees are poor and disease-ridden. They will take jobs away from Americans and strain welfare budgets. They practice an alien religion and pledge allegiance to a foreign leader. They will bring crime with them. They are rapists. And worst of all, these undesirables are Irish. This is from a newspaper in 1847, when the Irish were suffering from their own environmental economic crisis, the potato famine. And they came to the United States untrusted, unloved, and unwelcome. There's that quote that I just read to you. In 1890, a New York newspaper wrote, "The floodgates are open, the bars are down, the sally ports are unguarded, the dam is washed away, the sewer is unchoked." I love this language. Europe is vomiting. In other words, the scum of immigration is viscerating upon our shores. They're talking about Italians. In 1914, Bishop Charles Henry Brent wrote, "The United States is in far greater danger from the quality of immigration that comes from Southern Europe than any peril that could come by Japanese ownership of lands in California or from Asiatic immigration." This is all of South Europe that he was railing against. Similar campaigns were held against Chinese immigration and then Japanese immigration. In fact, every group that came to the United States has been threatened in one way or another. This resistance to immigration is not new in this particular crisis. That's not to say that this crisis is not important. We just need to know where this pressure is coming from. And we also, in my opinion, need to start building allies and helping to fight this. And the more we can help people understand that the cultures that they came from were treated in exactly the same way when they came to America's shores, the more we can start to build empathy and understanding and outrage at what's going on. I was conscious of what was going on at southern borders, but it was part of my daily life. You know, you listen to the National Public Radio when you drive your car, you watch the news, you read the newspaper. There are things happening, and if you allow yourself to be outraged with every bit of that, then you're not going to have a very nice life, and I wanted to have a good life. But when I saw Fort Sill being reconstituted as a concentration camp, once again, my outrage became absolute, and I went ahead and started becoming active in this area. I went down to visit the southern border. I got into a project that the Jesuits were putting on, where we actually got to visit with people that were trying to come in through the immigration process, and heard their stories and understood from a visceral sense of why it was so important for them to immigrate to the United States and what their motivations were. And in all of those stories, I recognized all the stories of my family. I recognized all the stories of my friends. And as I'm relating this to people, as I work up and down through the state, I'm hearing these stories told back to me from people that are Irish, from people that are Italian, from people that are from Honduras, from people that are from Vietnam. All of these stories come back. Together, we can make a huge difference. But we need to help people understand that each one of these immigrants is us. Okay, and then the second part that I wanted to talk about is, why do people immigrate? Well, same reason they've always wanted to immigrate, right? One, there's conflict in their particular part of the world, and so they want to go someplace that's safe. When I was down in Tijuana, I met folks who were coming simply because people in their towns were disappearing. Their parents didn't come home at night, and they didn't know why. There were battles going on in the streets. I want to move my kids away from there too. Made perfect sense to me. The government was something that they didn't trust it. So maybe Bill will move to Canada or something. But this is another push kind of immigration issue. Religion. Either it's a push one because you're living someplace that the religion's not doing what you want it to, or it's a pull because you see a religion in another place that you want to go be a part of. Education, job opportunities. Again, push because it's not there in the place where you are, or a pull because you see it in some other part of the world that you want to move to. Your family. I'm thinking sometimes that's a push, sometimes that's a pull. Depends on your family. But I want to particularly talk about the push and pull of nature and environmental issues. So everywhere except in the United States, there's an agreement that the world is getting hotter. Okay? And I was in Europe, in Oslo the other day, and this guy introduced me. Well, before he introduced me, he came up to me and he says, now you need to understand, in Europe, this is not a controversy, right? So you don't have to convince us of this. You just need to say it and you know what you're talking about. There's also a consensus that this problem is caused largely by human activities, by the greenhouse gases, by the greenhouse effect. All of these climate change triggers desertification. And at that international conference, I learned there are about 12 ways to say that word. But drought, turning the world into deserts. Deforestation, losing the forests. Land degradation, the land is not fit to be used agriculturally. Rising sea levels, floods. We have more frequent, more extreme storms, earthquakes, volcanoes. And now let's think about where are these global warming events going to be most profound? Where is it warmer in our world? The closer you get to the equator, right? Where's South and Central America? Right there. Where are most of the glaciers in land-based glaciers? Except for the two poles, they're in South America. Where do you have places that are starting to lose agricultural lands? It's in South America. And you see almost 80% of the people now have moved into cities internally. And they're not living in the country anymore because that land just doesn't support them the way that it used to. Okay, so let me do this really quickly. The Institute for Economics, and people estimate that in 2017 alone, 18 million people were forced to move due to natural disasters. 18 million people. And they estimate that nearly 1 billion people currently are living in very high or high climate exposure, which could result in those people being displaced. And the people that are being displaced are the poor, primarily, because where do they live? They live in the least desirable lands. What are the least desirable lands? The ones that are below sea level, the ones that are on inclines, steep inclines in their cities, which are the places that are most vulnerable to these kinds of environmental changes. All of those places, low-lying lands, places that are not good agriculturally now, and places that are very steep and difficult to build on. The 2018 World Bank report estimates by 2050 there'll be 143 million climate change-driven migrants from the regions of Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia alone. So it's very profound for those folks. Now, when I was talking about U.S. history, there's a lot of us in California that should have a lot of empathy for having an environmental change make a migration or an immigration process. If you think about the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, the United States was going through a pretty severe economic and environmental problem in the Midwest, and all those people came out north. Turns out that those Okies came here for the same sorts of reasons that the immigrants are coming here. And now, 1/8 of the people in California trace their roots back to the Okies. So, if there's a group that ought to have empathy for this, that certainly should be one. Okay, I see my time has run out, so let me close with this quote, because I think it capsulizes everything that is important here. The value of history is indeed not scientific, but moral. By liberalizing the mind, by deepening the sympathies, by fortifying the will, it enables us to control not society, but ourselves. A much more important thing. It prepares us to live more humanely in the present and to meet rather than to foretell the future. We need to change the way that we think about things. And the way that I have gone about that and the folks that I've been meeting around the country and internationally as we talk about this crisis is I try to relate to them what happened to them and their forebears, how that relates directly to them, and how they should have empathy for us, not for them, for the people that are coming into the country and are trying to be new members of our society. We need to invite them, just as we wanted to be invited when our families came. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Our third speaker is Zenaida Velasquez. Zenaida was a pioneer in the movement for human rights in Honduras. She denounced the disappearance of her brother Manfredo Velasquez before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in Washington, D.C. The case was brought to the Human Rights Court in San Jose, Costa Rica, and it concluded that the Honduran government was responsible for her brother's disappearance. And it issued a groundbreaking decision that a government can be held liable for disappearances and unlawful killings. Zenaida has worked as a public health educator and was founder of COADE, and that stands for El Comité de Familiares de los, I'm going to take off my glasses, Detenidos y Desaparecidos de Honduras. Zenaida Velasquez.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the words of my predecessors. Amazingly well put. Senator Monning, you know the situation really well. And I want to welcome this lady in particular, this one in the red blouse, Dana Frank. I have given her the Honduran nationality because she loves my country. She has done a lot of work for it. So, it is so heartening that when you were talking about immigration, I just want to say this little thing. I came here as a refugee, searching for political asylum because my life was in danger after fighting my government for my brother's disappearance. And it's not easy. I came with support, but it's not easy to leave your country, to leave your family, to leave your friends, to leave everything. It's very painful. So those people coming in caravans, it's not because they want to make a lot of fuss in the United States. They come because they have been pushed, as you said, yeah. So anyway, in a little context of my country, Honduras, this is our flag. We have had, since the late 1800s, we had elections, but we also had the presence of the Americans. One famous guy was Samuel Semurray, and he chose the best lands near the fast-flowing rivers to cultivate his bananas. He founded the Cuyamel banana plantation because he took that name because it was next to a river with that name. These guys, all these guys, then came the United Fruit, Chiquita Banana, all these guys were deciding who was going to be the next president of Honduras. They decided everything. And in exchange, they got a lot of concessions, they got a lot of favors, they got the best lands, they got everything they wanted. And so what was the consequence of that? More poverty to our people. And guess what? They also had something called the commissariat, something where they were selling products. So they were paying the workers a minimum salary, and they took it back because they had all those products to sell back to them. So nothing was left for our country, not even taxes. They never paid taxes on all that richness they got out of Honduras. And so, unfortunately, we had all these presidents. Like first, there was someone whose name was Tiburcio Carías Andino. And Tiburcio conceded a lot of favors, of course, and obeyed all the policies that the United States mandated to these people, and he was a dictatorship from 1932 to 1949. Can you imagine? And then he put in he decided that who was going to be his successor, he decided to quit on January of 1949, and then he named another lawyer that had been also a servant of the Americans. So it's been a history, a terrible history. And more recently, we are back. History repeats, you said that. The history repeats. We are back to a tyrant, to a dictatorship, to someone that obeys whatever the American government says. We had a coup d'etat in 1963, and that was done by military, and those army guys were in charge of the country for 18 years, from 1963 until 1981. Of course, the Constitution was really bad, so they decided to rewrite another Constitution in 1981, but it was still, even though a civilian had won the elections, it was still a general, an army general, who was in charge of the country while they were rewriting the Constitution. What is that Constitution doing to the people? Nothing. It's just a Constitution to favor the military, to favor the rich, and that's it. And so that's why we are screaming now and claiming that we need to have a new constitution that is for the people. So, then, in 2009, 10 years ago, we had another coup d'etat. Why? The democratically elected government headed by Manuel Zelaya, known as Mel Zelaya, was doing really, really good for the people. Considering, because there are always limitations, you know. And then he invited the people to a referendum, and that was his sin. That was the excuse to give a coup and destroy everything. And since then, I have no counts exactly, but we have had thousands of people killed just because they protest. I also, again, because you heard that I had a brother who was kidnapped and disappeared in 1981, I also, again, I and my family were victims of another pain. My youngest sister, who was a teacher, was demonstrating for her rights because she wanted to retire, went to apply for retirement, and she was told that she needed to be on a waiting list. A waiting list, she said. Why? Because there's no money. How come? Where are all the deductions they were taking every month from our checks? Where is that money? Well, there's no money. Guess what? The coup leaders of 2009 ransacked all the teachers' money they had put away for retirement. With her, there were more than 2,000 teachers who wanted to retire, and then they were demonstrating March 18th, 2011, and she was hit, probably a canister of the tear gas bomb, because the demonstration was heavily repressed. So again, we had the pain in the family. And with this, in 2009 coup, Unfortunately, it was the Obama administration, and this administration supported this coup, particularly Hillary Clinton on her role of the Secretary of State. She supported that, and she has no idea how many victims are there because of that coup. Innocent victims, people that go out in protests. So anyway, the current government is horrible, is a dictatorship, is a narco state, because just recently, from October the 2nd till October 18th, there was a trial at the Southern District Court of New York, where his youngest brother was being judged and found guilty on 4 counts. And this current president's name was mentioned many, many times. To the point that there was, amongst the witnesses, they were talking about book checks. And this person who had the book checks was working very closely to his youngest brother, and he was at the jail and was killed last Saturday, horribly assassinated. He was at a high security jail. How can the assassins get in, you know? And then there were 6 men who killed him, and they said that they were in the same jail. And so they found 4, but the other 2 are still at large, and they were at the jail. So it's very clearly, because this guy was already on extradition demand, and so it's very clear that this president sent to kill him. And also, not only that, but in the popular movement, there was a teacher, Jaime Rodriguez, a leader of the teachers' movement. He was kidnapped last Saturday, and so he was found on Monday, horribly tortured and with a cut on his neck. That was a message. That was a message. Don't move, don't go on demonstrations. And then, also on Tuesday, a young student, high school student, was taken away from his classroom in front of the teacher, in front of his classmates, by 2 men with masks, heavily armed. No one opposed that, and he was found dead on Friday, and the same happened to another young man, a university student, who was also found dead same Friday in the northern cities of Honduras. So what has been, I think, the bad thing to our people, to our country, is the presence of the United States and its policies, because they are the ones who decide what to be done in our countries. Also, the horrible neo-political policies, neo-economical policies, neoliberal policies, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, all of those decide what to do. They give orders to these people, to these presidents, and they have to privatize everything in order to get a loan and to get the country in huge debt. And most of that money that the bank, the International Monetary Fund, loans to them is stolen. Is corruption, criminality, you name it. It's horrible, the situation. And how come you as a parent, I'm going to try to find a better future for your children? how come you won't be doing that for your children, for your family? Someone is with a sign here. So we can talk weeks, months, and years about all that is going on in Honduras. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, with the assistance of translator Santiago Vire, we will have Porfirio Quintano. Here's a quote. "I had no money and spoke no English when I illegally crossed the border into California 23 years ago, but I worked hard and fought for the right to stay here. Had I made that harrowing journey this year, I'm sure I'd be deported right back into the crosshairs of the Honduran government's death squads that had targeted me and many other community organizers. Instead, I quickly won a grant of political asylum and later received full U.S. American citizenship." Porfirio Quintano is an environmental service aide at Sutter's Health California Pacific Medical Center and an elected rank-and-file member of the National Union of Healthcare Workers Executive Board. Porfirio Quintano.
Buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon. Like I say, my name is Porfirio Quintano. I am from Honduras, and I've been here in this country for about 22 years. Quiero agradecer a Santiago por la traducción. Quiero empezar diciendo que uno de los países más ignorados del mundo es Honduras. En los últimos años pareció emerger y aparecer en las primeras planas por varias razones. El golpe de Estado del 2009, la crisis de los inmigrantes, la narcoactividad, por ser el país más peligroso para los defensores del medio ambiente, por contar con un narcoejército y por muchas más actividades criminales, sin olvidar que cuenta con las ciudades más violentas del mundo.
Good afternoon to everybody. I would like first to thank my Salvador Santiago. One of the most neglected countries in the world is Honduras. During the last years, Honduras appeared on the spotlight in the media for several reasons. 2009 coup d'etat, the immigration crisis, drug trafficking, because it is the most dangerous country for environmental activists, because it has a narco army and many other criminal activities, without even mentioning that some of the most violent cities in the world are in our country.
Honduras es un país con 9 millones de habitantes, pero el 68% de la población vive debajo de la pobreza. Y 900 hondureños abandonan el país cada mes. Sin embargo, pese a llevar adelante políticas de libre comercio, libre mercado, no puede desarrollarse y salir adelante en muchos aspectos. Inclusive empeoró en los últimos años.
Honduras is a country with 9 million inhabitants, but 68% of the population lives in poverty, and 900 Hondurans leave the country every month. However, regardless a policy of free trade and open market, it's unable to develop and solve its problems in many aspects. It became even worse during the last years.
Una de las preguntas a plantearse es ¿qué llevó a Honduras a ser un país pobre y violento? Y más importante, ¿por qué se ignora a Honduras? Obviamente no veamos las respuestas simples o ideologizadas. Primeramente veamos un panorama histórico general.
One of the questions we have to ask ourselves is how Honduras became a poor and violent country. And most importantly, why Honduras is so neglected. Evidently, we are not going to delve into simple or ideologically based answers. First, I'm going to provide a historical overview.
Honduras es una república presidencialista unitaria. Es uno de los pocos países que es biooceánico. Su territorio está dividido en 18 departamentos, su capital es Tegucigalpa, pero la ciudad industrial es San Pedro Sula. El área más poblada del país es el oeste y el sur, mientras que el este está cubierto de selvas y mucho menos poblado. Cuenta con una gran biodiversidad con bastantes áreas protegidas, aunque amenazadas por la explotación minera a cielo abierto o lo que se llama extractivismo, y varios atractivos parques naturales que por esto debería contar con un potencial turístico, pero está en los últimos lugares de los números de turistas recibidos en Centroamérica.
Honduras is a unitary presidential republic, one of the few countries in the world that is bioceanic. Its territory has 18 departments. Its capital is Tegucigalpa, but the main industrial city is San Pedro Sula. The most populated areas of the country are the west and the south, whereas the east is an area of rainforest and has less population. It has an enormous biodiversity and it has many protected areas, and many of them are threatened because of open pit mining, or what is known as extractivism. It has also several national parks that are attractive, and for that reason, our country should have an enormous tourism potential, but it's ranked among the last positions as regards the amount of tourists in different countries in Central America.
Su economía depende del sector agropecuario, de la industria ligera y de las remesas provenientes de los más de 1 millón de migrantes hondureños que estamos principalmente aquí en Estados Unidos, Europa, los países de Centroamérica y también Sudamérica. Si analizamos los datos superficialmente, Honduras debería ser un país sencillo de desarrollarse. Cuenta con buena posición geográfica para proyectar su comercio a Europa, a todo el continente. Tiene una población homogénea, donde el 90% son mestizos, es decir, no hay conflictos étnicos o religiosos que hagan difícil el funcionamiento del país. No tiene ningún conflicto importante con algún país vecino, más bien tienen acuerdos de libre comercio con la Unión Europea, Estados Unidos, algunos países de Sudamérica y algunos países de Asia.
Its economy mainly depends on the agricultural sector, light industry, and the money that more than 1 million immigrants from Honduras send to their families. They are mainly here in the United States, Europe, the neighboring countries, and South America. If we analyze data at a simple glance, it should be easy to develop Honduras. It has a good geographic position, so it's easy to commerce with Europe and with all our continents. The population is homogeneous. 90% of people are of mixed race. That is to say that there are no ethnic or religious conflicts that may jeopardize the functioning of our country. It has no important conflict with any neighboring country, and it has free trade agreements with the European Union, United States, and countries in South America, Central America, and Asia.
Pero pese a todo esto, Honduras es un país muy pobre. Entonces, ¿por qué sucede? La respuesta no es muy sencilla, pero hay problemas graves del por qué dicho subdesarrollo. Por un lado está la cultura hondureña, que es esencialmente, y esto lo dicen los escritores y los estudiosos, esencialmente conservadora, a diferencia de otros países de la región. En Honduras no hubo grandes movimientos revolucionarios, ni tampoco movimientos culturales, ni tampoco movimientos artísticos notables. La cultura hondureña está centrada en la familia y no mucho más. Esto explica algo de por qué el desinterés y la apatía general que tuvo esta población con relación a su historia.
But regardless of all this, Honduras is a very poor country. So why is this happening? The answer is not really simple, but there are severe problems behind this history. On the one hand, Honduran culture that is mainly conservative compared to other countries in our region, and this is something that is stated by different writers and scholars. In Honduras, there were no important revolutionary movements, cultural movements, or artistic movements. Honduran culture is mainly focused in the family, and that's almost all. This somewhat explains why there is no interest and the society has this apathy as regards Honduran people and their history.
Por otro lado, siempre el poder en Honduras lo ha tenido un pequeño grupo de familias. Estos clanes se han enriquecido de manera rápida y desproporcionada, haciendo uso precisamente del poder y sus enlaces con el gobierno. Y se ha manipulado las leyes, decisiones y las decisiones administrativas. Hasta han tenido amnistías fiscales, concesiones, licencias, incluso ilegales, como la evasión de impuestos, el contrabando, la condonación ilegal de sus deudas con el fisco. El pueblo hondureño, por sí solo, no ha podido jamás superar este estado. Si bien es cierto, los apellidos de estas familias fueron cambiando durante el tiempo, las estructuras sociales siguen siendo la misma. La oligarquía hondureña actual está formada en su mayoría por familias provenientes del antiguo Imperio Otomano, que emigraron a Honduras a principios del siglo XX. Apellidos como los Facusé, Larash, Atala, Nazar, Cafier, Rosenthal, Goldstein, Yar, y hay que sumarle que hay un pakistaní nacionalizado hondureño que es el hombre más rico del país en estos momentos.
On the other hand, the power in Honduras has always been held by a small group of families. These groups have become wealthier very quickly and in an unbalanced manner, using the power and their bonds to the government, whether it is manipulating laws and administrative decisions, getting tax exemptions, being granted licenses, or some illegal procedures such as tax evasion, smuggling, or getting illegal forgiveness of tax debt. The people from Honduras on its own has never been able to overcome this stage. It's true that the last names of these families change during time, but the social structure remains the same. The current Honduran oligarchy is composed, in its majority, by families from the former Ottoman Empire that emigrated to Honduras in the beginning of the 20th century. We can find last names, for example, like Facuse, Larach, Atala, Nasser, Kafi, Rosenthal, Goldstein, Jar. And it's necessary to add a man from Pakistan that was naturalized as Honduran, and it's the richest man in the country.
El crecimiento económico de estas familias y algunos otros pocos clanes es directamente proporcional al crecimiento de la pobreza de los hondureños. Esta oligarquía concentra las peores características de las oligarquías latinoamericanas. Tiene secuestrado al Estado. Su riqueza depende de las industrias que no generan muchos trabajos. Controla los medios de comunicación, la justicia, la política y, para rematar, el 98% de los bancos son lavadores de dinero del narcotráfico.
Economic growth of these and other groups is directly proportional to the growth of poverty among Hondurans. This oligarchy concentrates and embodies the worst characteristics of every Latin American oligarchy. The state is kidnapped. Its wealth depends on industries that do not generate employment. They control the media, justice, politics, and what's worse, 98% of banks do money laundering from drug trafficking money.
La historia del narcotráfico en Honduras consta de 3 momentos. Primero empezó como un país de tránsito, luego de consumo y ahora de lavado de activos y la narcopolítica. Ya lo mencionó la Zenaida anteriormente, tenemos un gobierno narcotraficante. Y para rematar, hasta fue parte del escándalo Irán-Contras, como lo mencionó el senador. Y con el hombre fuerte que participó en esas actividades, Ramón Marta Ballesteros, está preso aquí en Estados Unidos con 12 cadenas perpetuas. Eso, en otras palabras, esta oligarquía gobernante, además de corrupta y mafiosa, es totalmente indiferente a los destinos de los hondureños. No les interesa el bienestar de este pueblo. Esto explica el porqué de la ineficiencia para controlar las bandas criminales que operan impunemente en el país. Si vemos, no hay víctimas ricas por parte del crimen organizado. Son todos pobres o de la clase media.
The history of drug trafficking in Honduras has 3 stages. First, as a transit country, then a drug-using country, and now money laundering and narco-politics. Already in the 70s, there were problems with drug trafficking, as Zenaida mentioned before, and the country was a part of the Iran-Contra scandal, as Senator said a minute ago, and the leader of this is Ramon Atayola, that's serving now here 12 life sentences. In other words, this ruling oligarchy is not only corrupt, it's not only a mafia, it's completely indifferent to the fate of Honduras. They are not interested in the well-being of the people, and this explains why the government is so inefficient to control the criminal gangs that are in the country. We are unable to see rich victims of these gangs. Everybody is poor or the middle class because this oligarchy has small private armies that protects them. That's why they are not interested.
Por otra parte, el crimen organizado quería, por el tiempo, ya veo que el tiempo se está alargando y escribí mucho, voy a enfocarme en lo que está sucediendo en este momento. En Honduras es el segundo país, o el segundo o el tercer país con problemas ambientales, y que es uno de los países más peligrosos para los defensores del medio ambiente. Cientos de defensores y defensoras han sido criminalizados, judicializados, asesinados por oponerse a las lógicas extractivistas en sus territorios y por defender sus territorios. Y todos ellos en completa indefensión. Para poner un ejemplo, 123 ambientalistas han sido asesinadas en Honduras, incluyendo Berta Cáceres, desde el 2010 al 2019. Desde el 2015 se habían registrado 751 concesiones para la explotación minera, más las concesiones de los ríos para la generación de energía eléctrica. Pese a que Honduras es suscriptor del convenio 169 de la OIT, las concesiones siguen dándose sin consultar a las comunidades.
As I'm running out of time, I will pass to the following topic because it seems that I've written too much. Honduras is the second ranked as regards environmental problems, and is one of the most dangerous countries for environmental activists. Hundreds of environmental activists have been criminalized, prosecuted, and killed because they are against the extractivist policies in their territories. And all of them were absolutely helpless. 123 environmental activists have been killed in Honduras, including Berta Cáceres, and this was from 2010 to 2019. Since 2015, there were more than 751 licenses for mining exploitations, without even counting the licenses that were granted for the exploitations of rivers for electrical generation. All these, regardless the fact that Honduras is a signing party of the Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization, these concessions continue without consulting the local communities.
Para concluir, quiero decir que esas son las verdades o las raíces de los problemas sociales y crisis que generan la migración, y que a lo que se les hace llamar caravanas, que en verdad son refugiados por la crisis actual en Honduras. En los medios en los medios escuchamos que los hondureños emigran por la violencia y la migración, pero solo está ahí. Todo esto y muchísimas más que tengo escritas acá son las razones por las que se menciona Honduras y las caravanas de migrantes, pero como repito, son caravanas de refugiados, y así lo deberían de nombrar los foros internacionales como la ONU y los demás.
To conclude, this are the causes, among many others that I wanted to talk to you about, These are the causes of the immigration crisis, of the caravans of people that are in fact refugees, regardless of what the media may say. It's not poverty, it's not violence what causes these caravans. There are many other causes of this violence, and I insist, these caravans are in fact refugees, and this is the way they should be acknowledged at the UN and in other organizations.
Muchas gracias por tenerlos acá y agradecemos su presencia y la solidaridad con los pueblos latinoamericanos, especialmente con Honduras.
Thank you very much for coming here.
Continuity, there wasn't a huge gap necessarily between Reagan and the present day. The connective tissue has been the economic relationships, the trade agreements that favor protecting the elites and exploiting the poor, as Porfirio described. That changes, in my view, it's always the result of resistance and international solidarity, both in the countries we're talking about and here in the United States.
I see no difference, unfortunately, and I don't know which one is worse. Probably the current one, because this one besides is crazy. Also, but Reagan, this is thanks to Reagan that we had implemented the doctrine of national security in Honduras and when all those disappearances started. And we have 184 people who were disappeared. My brother was disappeared in 81, it's 38 years now, and we never knew or saw his remains. That is really painful. My mother died at the age of 62 from pain and suffering. And it is having like an open wound that never heals. Because if we don't find remains, it's like that. So thanks to Reagan. And so when they were talking that he died and all of that, guess what? I was really very resentful towards what he did. Not only they disappeared people, they also extrajudicially killed lots of people. They were found on the side of roads, on dumpsters, heavily tortured. They have inflicted so much pain. You have no idea. Thank you.
Para mí la diferencia entre Ronald Reagan y en el momento es que en esa época hubieron 80,000 muertos en El Salvador. Ahora en Honduras desde 2010 hay 70,000. Y cuando Ronald Reagan, pues ya sabemos que Honduras era un país, el Pentágono, o un país o un puente para atacar los movimientos revolucionarios del área. Ahora ya no están, pero el negocio de las armas sigue, y es Honduras el país que tiene más armas, más ejército. Entonces, como decía Zenaida, no ha cambiado, no hay mucha diferencia, solo han cambiado los actores.
In my opinion, the difference between the Reagan administration and the current administration is that during the Reagan administration there were 80,000 dead in El Salvador, and now in our country, since 2010, there has been 70,000 deaths. So Before, during the Reagan years, Honduras was the bridge that the Pentagon used to fight Latin American revolutionary movements. The Reagan administration is no longer there, but Honduras continues suffering from the gangs that are there. They continue suffering of the weapons of the army, and as Zenaida said, there is no change in the policy, only in the perpetrators.
Can I have that one? Actually, I'm going to switch my Honduras continues to be that region. And so we still have U.S. military bases. During the 80s, we had 17 U.S. military bases in that country. And all of that was to train the Contras to attack the Salvadoran guerrillas, to attack the Sandinistas, etc. We are, I would consider that our country is a non-declared colony of the United States.
And so now with the second question, we'll start with Zenaida, then Profiro, and then back to Senator Bill Monning. So this question comes from Peter. Thank you very much, Peter. Journalist Ana Quintero states, caravan activists are weaponizing poor Central Americans for illegally heading to enter America. And I would add U.S. America. Should this misuse of immigrants be supported?
These immigrants need to be supported. I was telling at the beginning, I came as a refugee 31 years ago, in 88. I cried all the way. It was painful to leave everything behind. I have been participating in a struggle with the families of the disappeared. We co-founded that committee of families of the disappeared. They are still acting because the situation hasn't changed, it has become worse. So these people that are coming, searching for refuge, searching for political asylum, searching for a better life for their family, that's a human right. And why is this attitude? This country is made up of immigration from all over the world. And it is their culprit, because also the neoliberal economic policies are the culprit of all this impoverishment. We are getting to the point of having 9 out of 10 people in poverty. So what do they want? People have the need to survive, to find something better for their family, for their children. So we need to support these people. I see no other way. It is inhumane by this man in the White House. All the expressions he has had for all these people, totally inhumane. It's crazy, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, come on. Can you repeat the question for that?
Okay. Wait. Journalist Ana Quintero states, I'll just do it like that, Santiago. Journalist Ana Quintaro states, caravan activists are weaponizing poor Central Americans for illegally heading to enter America. And I would add US America. Should this misuse of immigrants be supported? And that's from Peter.
Bueno, quería estar bien claro, o sea, la pregunta, pero yo pienso que solo se habla del movimiento o de la salida de los inmigrantes de los países del Triángulo Norte, pero nosotros podemos hacer, si no queremos apoyar o que los inmigrantes salgan de los países, debemos de poner presión a los congresistas o todos los políticos a que se manifiesten y hacer responsable a Donald Trump por tener a un presidente de Honduras que se ha robado 2 veces las elecciones, que es narcotraficante, ha sido mencionado 97 veces en la Corte del Sur de Nueva York en el litigio de su hermano. Entonces, si no fuera en la última elección del 2017, la misma OEA dijo que se deberían de repetir las elecciones, y lo mismo lo dijo la Comunidad Económica Europea, pero el siguiente día la Embajada de los Estados Unidos hizo una conferencia de prensa y reconoció el triunfo del dictador Hernández, o como le decimos nosotros, Juan Orlando Hernández. Entonces, nadie quiere inmigrar, nadie quiere dejar su familia, nadie quiere dejar su terruño donde nació. Pero, como ya lo dijeron los que me antecedieron, la inmigración es producto de las políticas, no de nosotros los que estamos acá, sino las políticas de los que gobiernan a Estados Unidos. Y se incrementó el 30% de la migración a partir del golpe de Estado del 2009. ¿Y quién apoyó al golpe de Estado del 2009? Hillary Clinton. Así que, si no queremos que la inmigración, o si debemos aceptar o no, pero lo primero, nuestra tarea debe ser lo que nosotros estamos haciendo acá. Y ustedes ya están haciendo o lo estamos haciendo, por estar acá en este foro escuchando, y van a tomar su tarea de hacer, llamar y hacer activismo.
I want this to be clear. I want this to be clear as regards the movement, as regards immigration. It is only up to us to support migrants. It's up to us to put pressure on the Congress, on the politicians. For that reason, Donald Trump must be held accountable because the president of Honduras has committed twice election fraud. And he's also a drug dealer whose name appears 97 times in the South District Court of New York because of his brother. If we were not for example, the 2017 elections that were disapproved both by the OEA and by the European Union. But at the following day of those elections, the US Embassy held a press conference to support the dictator Hernandez, who, as we call him, Juan Orlando Hernandez. Let's be clear about this. Nobody wants to emigrate. Nobody wants to leave their families, the land in which we were born. And I think that the previous speaker already left that pretty clear. Immigration is the consequence of the different policies implemented not by us, but by the government of the United States. Since the coup d'etat of 2009, immigration in Honduras raised by 30%. So the question is, who supported the dictator? Hillary Clinton. What we should do for immigration? What we are doing here, listening to this panel, supporting, being activists.
So I'll just add a little bit to that. I think it's been answered adequately. With all due respect to Peter, the premise of the question is wrong. The person who has weaponized the crisis of immigration flows from Central America is the current occupant of the White House. He has weaponized and sought to dehumanize the people that are fleeing as a result of the policies. The commonality between Trump and Hernandez in Honduras is that they both won by fraud and by employing outside influencers in their elections. The New York Times has documented that Trump has lied since his oath of office over 10,000 times. Over 10,000 times. So before you accept anything that comes out of his mouth, question the source. The people that flee their homeland, it's probably the toughest choice they've ever made in their lives. And they're pushed out of their country. And it's our job to denationalize this and internationalize a humanitarian response.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to start, with Profero, sorry, Zenaida. We're going to start with Profero this time. And this question is from Steve. Why not get together with Latin American leaders and try to come up with ways to make the situation better down there so the people don't want or have to leave?
Bueno, el Fondo Monetario Internacional, el Banco Mundial, ha tratado de implementar políticas, como decía Zenaida, en el neoliberalismo, y a cada país le propone, y la misma administración de acá propone planes. Ustedes han escuchado el Plan Colombia, Plan Panamá, un tratado del Triángulo Norte, pero ninguno funciona porque ahí hay intereses y todos los planes que se buscan para poner juntos a los líderes, la comunidad entiende que lo que se lleva es un plan de colonización. Tenemos el tratado de la Alianza del Triángulo Norte, que es Guatemala, El Salvador y Honduras. Ustedes escucharon que Donald Trump ha chantajeado a estos gobiernos y los ha puesto a que acepten a estos países como terceros países seguros, en otras palabras. Lo que quiero decir con eso es decir, los líderes se sientan en una mesa, planean, pero no les funcionan las políticas, porque no incluyen a la comunidad. Esos dólares que nosotros pagamos en impuestos y que se van y que a Honduras le tocan 700 millones, todos van a las bolsas de los corruptos. Entonces, ¿qué quiero decir? Tal vez no me haga perdido en la respuesta, pero lo que quiero decir es que sí, los tratan de poner juntos, pero las comunidades allá sabemos que son planes de colonialismo y por eso no funcionan.
The IMF, the World Bank, tried to influence different policies, as Zenaida just stated. These are policies of neoliberalism from different countries that are proposed by this administration. We've heard of Plan Colombia, Plan Panama, Plan of the North Triangle, but they don't work because of the fact that all plans, when the leaders gather together, what the community thinks is that these are colonization plans. We've had many treaties, the treaties of El Salvador, the treaties of Guatemala, Honduras, of the North Atlantic Triangle. You've heard Trump blackmailing governments to force them to agree to be fair, safe countries. We all know, we have heard of leaders that sit down and they plan policies that doesn't work because they exclude the community. For example, from our taxes, we send to Honduras 700 millions. And what I want to say, what I want to be clear, is that they try to get leaders together, but we believe that is colonialism, and that's why it doesn't work.
So if you look at the premise of this question is right. We should be investing in the people in these countries and helping to build the economies in these countries and around the world. That's how you defeat people fleeing poverty and violence, is by investing. So the 700 million of our tax dollars going to Honduras, it's not being invested in the people. In fact, if you follow the money, that's not taken through corruption comes back to buy armaments to militarize these countries and to respond to people fighting for fundamental human rights. They're criminalized, they're called communists, and they're executed and disappeared. And that's our tax dollar that's part of that cycle of violence. So what our demand has to be domestically is for the people that control our budget in Washington, D.C., and for whoever's in the White House, to break the cycle of corruption and violence and to reduce what's going into military budgets and put them into investments into the uplift of humans in investing in healthcare, agricultural support. The trade agreements we have with Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala have opened the way for U.S. agricultural companies to go in and dominate the control of seeds, so that the people in Mexico and Central America are in violation of U.S. patents if they grow seeds for plants for corn that they've been growing for generations. So the problems are complex, but the solutions aren't. The solutions are to organize and to build support for those who are willing to break these past patterns of corrupt relationships.
What's that? Monsanto is there.
Yes.
Monsanto is there, controlling that too. And as my dearest friend was saying, that is not money invested in the industry, in centers of work for these people to go and get a job and don't think about leaving their country. Nothing. It's pure militarization. You have no idea, because the popular movement there, since day one after the coup d'etat, have been on the streets, have been fighting. But you have no idea how much money from this money sent from here is spent just in tear gas bombs. And I don't know what the health consequences are going to be, but the people of Honduras have breathed all those gases for days, for months, for years, because they are on the street fighting. They were today fighting. They were on the streets. They want this narco dictator out. But it is impossible if he continues being supported by the United States. Exactly the next day after the District Court of New York found his brother guilty, the economic attaché?
Charged affairs.
Charged affair attaché was, hugging, laughing with him. Like he get the message. He's protected, so he's not moving even though the outcry is general. Even people from his own party, even people on business are asking him to go. He's not moving. He knows he's supported, and he has, of course, with this money, he has incredible armament, incredible support from the army. He controls the army, he controls Congress, he controls the Supreme Court, he controls everything. There was a time when they were saying they had a plan, Honduras open for business. You know what they were inviting to? To have the investors taking the best territory of Honduras to establish sweatshops. We have sweatshops. How much are people earning there? The control they have, especially with women. They don't want them to get pregnant. They force them to take what is it called?
Birth control.
Birth control. So it's horrible. And they have been taking people that have been there for centuries in those territories, especially the African descent people that have been on those territories for centuries. They have forced them to go out and have this Korean or whoever goes there to establish sweatshops. Is that a solution? Of course not.
Thank you. Now, yes, thank you. And now Bill will take the first answer. So we have one more question here that was asked by a couple of people. And then after that, you'll each get to say something that you would like to share beyond that. So there's so much that we envision that could be done, right? What would you change in U.S. foreign policy? What one or two things do you believe would have the biggest impact and or are most important? Just however you want to interpret that. If you could say one or two things, what do you think would to change really the U.S. American policy to have the most impact?
Well, the first thing would be more transparency through our media as to how our tax dollars are being used, our military aid in these countries. The American people, the U.S. people, aren't hearing what we're hearing tonight. And the media is not sharing it. The media is telling a masked story or a sanitized story or a non-story. How many of the presidential candidates in the debates have been asked or addressed the crisis in Central America and of immigration? There's been some comment about the detention at the border and the separation of children and families, but nobody's going behind that. So we need to demand of our media that we want that coverage, and we need to use our means of media, the internet, social platforms, to push out a story from the voices of the people we're hearing from tonight. And I just want to offer one other comment too. We've heard several of the testimonies of the violence and repression against environmental activists. I believe one of the connections for hope is that the crisis of climate change unifies people on this planet to save this planet. And some of the fighters in Mexico and Central America and South America have been persecuted, they've been assassinated, and that hasn't been in our media. We need to be those voices in this country and link with people around the world who are fighting the same fight, but on different playing fields. Right now, there's a lot of environmental activists and climate change activists in this country. They're not facing that type of repression. We have the ability to speak out. But when we talk in California, the California legislature, about setting targets for renewable energy in California, we have a responsibility not to limit that conversation to California or the U.S., but to expand and give voice to those who are being repressed as we speak. Their only channel to the American people is us.
I said I almost have nothing to add, but, oh,
Can we hold that up?
yeah,
Which one?
this one.
Okay.
So, if you see,
Here, I'll hold this side and you can
if you see the location of Honduras, right here, I'm sorry to give you my back. The location of Honduras is at the center of this continent, but it has easy connection with the entire world. And Honduras has been used as the aircraft for this country. That's why they have all these military bases. The biggest one, which is called Palmerola, is located at the center of the country. From there, the United States can control everything. If a fly starts moving, they control that. There is Cuba, somewhere here. There is Cuba. There is El Salvador that had guerrilla. There is Guatemala that had guerrilla. There is Nicaragua that had Sandinistas too. Anything can be controlled from there. So, geographically, has a very important position, and that's why, thank you, that's why the United States is not going to let go of Honduras ever. So, I don't know what else to say. I think you have to understand all of this. What is the situation? What is all the interest that is there? And it's only interest for the rich, for the powerful. They don't care about the poverty. When do you hear the news about Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala? When? In Honduras?
Democracy Now! Covers it.
In Honduras, this man controlled the press too. That's why anything or very little comes out. Thank God for this social media now, using the cell phones and all of that, the computers. But other than that, everything is under control. Nobody knows anything, and that's also why people don't react. I'm so happy because this organization of yours has been very famous, especially during the guerrillas in El Salvador, when the Sandinistas, it was a very well-known movement. So I'm so happy that it's reviving. I thank you, really. And we need to continue doing that. I don't know what I'm going to do, but there is someone that has a lot to say about Honduras here, and I want to invite her to say something.
Actually, we're going to go to Profiro.
Yes. Yes.
So, Porfirio.
Porfirio.
Before I go here.
Bueno, como lo decía el senador, bueno, la tarea de nosotros y la única manera es, pues, debe de ser eso de la denuncia. La denuncia de la colusión entre el gobierno de los Estados Unidos con el dictador y la doble moral. Porque, por ejemplo, tenemos a Venezuela. Si comparamos la inmigración de Venezuela con la inmigración hondureña, o la inmigración guatemalteca, o la inmigración, es totalmente, los números no, o sea, quiero decir, hay más inmigrantes en Honduras. Y ustedes se preguntarán, ¿será posible que en ese país no hay nada bueno que estos hondureños no hablen? Podrán preguntarse, ¿verdad? Pero yo sé que aquí hay, como lo decía Zenaida, internacionalistas desde los 80, desde muchos años, y conocen bien esta situación. Y por esas razones que nosotros hablamos, porque es verdad, Honduras es un estado fallido, es un estado, un narcoestado. Las Fuerzas Armadas a las que este país apoya son las que cuidan o pasan la droga o están involucradas en la droga. Como lo decía desde muchos años atrás, en los 70, en los 80, se ha venido hablando de esto. Y yo decía algo, la sociedad hondureña los ha considerado conservadores, porque los movimientos que han habido no han sido, o sea, con todo lo que está pasando, ya el gobierno, este gobierno estuviera fuera. Tenemos el ejemplo de Chile, tenemos el ejemplo de Ecuador, pero en Honduras hay pocos de resistencia, pero todos son comprados con el mismo dinero que nosotros. ¿Qué pasó hoy cuando lo de la Corte de Nueva York con PH, con Tony Hernández? Inmediatamente se sientan los líderes en Honduras e inmediatamente alguien los llama que vengan a hablar a Estados Unidos. ¿Cómo le llamó a Chávez a estos piquillanques? Por la razón de que la lucha es en Honduras. Nosotros tenemos que tumbar a Juan Orlando, pero unidos a él. Y por eso es que yo decía, y lo sigo sosteniendo, y lo sostenemos varios, no es que estemos poniendo por el suelo la lucha que hay, pero no hay una lucha granítica. Y no la hay porque este país tiene la bota en todos lados, en estos pobres países. Ahora tenemos en El Salvador, tenemos un gobierno que se pinta de populista, pero ¿qué ha hecho? Lo primero que fue crear una policía para detener a los inmigrantes, y luego el primer tratado como país seguro. Entonces, y ha seguido con Guatemala, incluso Guatemala es como que como que no hay seguridad de eso, pero el país de Honduras sigue siendo el centro, y comparto lo que dice Zelaya. Estados Unidos no va a dejar que la resistencia tome el poder en Honduras, porque saben que 2 veces, aunque no haya unificación política, le han ganado las elecciones, y las 2 veces se las ha robado Juan Orlando. Entonces, por esa razón, y por lo que explicaba Senado, es que en Honduras no habrá un cambio si este gobierno que está en este momento, y si los otros que vienen no dicen y toman una determinación, porque Juan Orlando en Honduras se mantiene solo por el apoyo del Departamento de Estado.
So, as Zenaida said, our aim, our task is to talk about this issue. Is to talk so as to oppose this dictator and to oppose also the double standard. Let's think of the case of Venezuela. If we compare it with Honduras, with Guatemala, there has been much more immigration in Honduras and Guatemala than in our countries. And you may well ask, how is it possible? You certainly, Honduras must have something good to tell. But as we were saying, and in the 80s, international specialists have been stating that Honduras is a failed state, a narco state, supported with an army supported by the US, and this army takes care of drug trafficking. In fact, they are the perpetrators of drug trafficking. And during the 70s, the 80s, we talked about what I said before about Honduras, that is a conservative country in which the movements that maybe are working there do not protest compared to the people we've seen, for example, in Chile, in Ecuador. The situation doesn't burst. It's true, in Honduras there are some movements that are resisting, but they are bought by our government with money. the money, in fact, that we give to them when we pay our taxes. And this is also visible in the case of the New York court, the case against Tony Hernandez. And as we see, Honduras is supported by what Chavez considered to be the petty Yankees at some given point. And this fight in Honduras, this fight against Juan Orlando, mustn't be undermined because of the fact that it's not collective, must not be undermined. In this case, it's, as we said, in El Salvador, there was also this case, and the government may, in this case, sign any treaty, allowing the country in El Salvador to be the first country who signed the treaty to be a safe state for immigrants. Something that even Guatemala is, in fact, considering to drop, but not the case in Honduras. Not in the case in Honduras, as Zenaida said, the US won't let Honduras. They have already committed fraud in 2 elections for Juan Orlando. Again, that's what Zenaida said. That's why Honduras won't change if the US government doesn't stop intervening and doesn't, and if it takes the decision to stop supporting dictator Juan Orlando. The only reason that prevents that from happening is called State Department.
Thank you very much, and I know there's so much more that can be said about this. We will reconvene, we will stay connected, and there's going to be time. We're going to finish, we're running a little late, but we're going to wrap up in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and there'll be one final comment starting first with Zenaida, and then I have some short closing words. Before that, I want to thank, speaking of media and social media and getting information out there, I'd like to name and thank Wes White and Dred McCall, who are in the room right now and are capturing what's going on. And they will be putting that out there for the world to see and inviting everyone else to join us. And they can like us on Facebook at the People's Oral History Project, and we will make sure that that makes it on to the Latin American Solidarity Committee. Also, I would like to let you know that all of you are invited to take an orchid, the national flower of Honduras, behind you as our gift and a small appreciation for your time in being with us here tonight. So now I would ask if you just have a word or two that you would like to say that you haven't had a chance to say. And we'll start with Zenaida and we'll end with Senator Monning, and then I have a couple of closing words.
Thank you. Yes, there's a lot to say, but one of the things is that in regards to all these plans that they have been thinking about, is that they try to copy all plans that have failed. For example, they have tried to transplant the Plan Colombia to Honduras. It's another reality. It's not going to work, you know? And we, in regards to militarization, we also know that in Honduras we have 1,000 Israeli soldiers. What are they doing there? Training our army to be, you know, to be killing more people. We have had so many victims. I think 70,000 is getting shorter now. It's every day. I was there visiting in May. Every day in the news, there were approximately 20 people killed every day. And it's mostly the young people. Gangs is a serious problem. They have incredible armament, and they were the best customers of Tony Hernandez. the brother of the president, who was selling arms. And he was selling the arms to the gangs. They bought it, and then Juan Orlando will order to be taken away this arm that his brother had a great business, because he would have to sell again. So the corruption is rampant. It's unimaginable. They have stolen a lot of money. They have broken the Instituto Hondureño de Seguridad Social, the Honduran Institute of Social Security, where all the retirees health care. They stole for this campaign 350,000 million. They have stolen so much money that I don't know how that poor country is still surviving and they haven't declared bankruptcy. I don't know. Anyway, as I was saying, it's a lot to say.
So I want to close, and I want to say a little bit in my broken English, but you might be asking yourself what we can do other than call or write op-ed in newspapers. So, for example, we have groups that we support in Honduras in this fight in the streets. You can get connect with us to support, because like Zenaida was saying, there are thousands of bombs through, and people need at least to carry something wet with vinegar to protect. But also, we are supporting communities. For example, right now, we have a project in a little town in the center of the country called Araujo Pueblo, where is the banana. It was a banana country around. We are trying to build a hospital over it. So, if any of you wants to get involved in many steps or many ways, we are here to connect with the movement in Honduras, with the people who are in the streets, because they are ONGs too, that they are working. But when you get connected to the ONG, that money doesn't go to the people who are in the street, putting their skin, their face to fight the government. So that's why I will ask, if you have that question, just connect with Zenaida, with us, with Marlene, with whoever you are. We can tell you how to get involved directly in the movement, as you can do it in this country, calling the media, like the senator says, or calling those candidates to put in the debate, to tell Donald Trump, why you took a picture with Joe, with Hope, and it will be, we want to see if they're gonna do it. And I'm sorry, Santiago,
Well, I just want to add my thanks. I'd like to thank Santiago for amazing interpretation. I'm glad we have him here, and he's not at the United Nations, but we might find him there someday.
We can agree on a salary.
A negotiator and an interpreter. I also just want to thank all the organizers for the revival of the Latin American Solidarity Committee. Gary, Ann, Lisa, Sally, Demetrio, Mibs, everyone who helped with this evening's organizing. And let's give a big hand to our moderator. And I also just again want to thank Dana Frank, who's been one of the intellectual connectors, but beyond an academic. She's been an academic activist who has helped us connect today. So let's thank Dana Frank.
Our 1945 Libertad Cáceres Human Rights and Honduras Act, which now has 74 members on it, asking that the U.S. suspend police and military aid to Honduras. Jimmy Panetta is on it, has been on it only reluctantly. You can ask him to get other members on it, and you can also try to get Feinstein and Harris to support it in the Senate. No one's introduced it yet. Good luck with that one, but it'd be a good moment to recognize.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, and I would urge, just because Jimmy Panetta is the Congress member for this region, that people should have thanked him for...
And ask him to do more.
And ask him to do more.
HR 1945.
HR 1945.
Human rights and Honduras that suspends all police and military aid to others. And the numbers are still growing. Like every week we get more and more.
And then my final comment, my first exposure to the struggle in Latin America was as a member of the Lawyers Guild, a labor delegation to Guatemala in 1979. We were hosted by the Federación de Trabajadores de Guatemala. We published this report in a complaint with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We interviewed a lot of victims of repression in different sectors, but our guide and our interlocutor during that trip in April of 1979 was a labor organizer named Felipe Garcia Cac. He was from an indigenous community. His father had died in the labor movement, and in January of 1980, at the age of 27, Felipe Garcia Cac was killed in the Spanish Embassy massacre, where marchers from Quiche had taken refuge and sanctuary in the Spanish Embassy, and the Guatemalan military moved in and set fire to the embassy. 31 people were killed, including Felipe Garcia Cac. We dedicated our report to his memory, and that was a few years ago, but his spirit lives, as does that of the legacy of everyone who's died trying to help others. So viva Felipe Garcia Cac, and thank you to all of you.
So friends, what we have heard tonight is heavy. We know the road is long and the burden is great. And lives have been lost, lives are being lost at this moment, and lives have been saved because of the unceasing, diligent efforts of people who would speak up for justice, for what is right, who will not set down the vision of the world that we share. Those who would hoard the world's resources are a few, but they are a deadly few. They do it to the detriment of the vast majority of people and at the destruction of our planet. There is much to do. But in this room now, there are those, and those listening, who will see this video, and those sitting here now. And you know who you are. Take this in. You are working to abolish corporate personhood. You are working for multiculturalism, anti-oppression, anti-racism. You are working to serve as an elected official speaking up for justice. You are working to get people elected into office who hold your values. You are working to save the climate, to hold up human rights, help refugees, help immigrants, on and on and on. Hold on to that hope, because every dollar you give, every amount of time you give, every witness testimonial you give to share what you have seen makes a difference and will move people. Do not let anyone tell you that your love does not matter, that your empathy is not as strong as those who would destroy our world and are moving forward with hate. I'll end this with something, since we're in the house of the Unitarian Universalists. This is from the turn of the last century, the 1900s, the Reverend Edward Everett Hale. And what he said is, He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Let's draw that circle of justice and legislation and policy and grit. And let's keep moving this forward. Thank you so much for being here tonight.